What's up, guys? This is Coach Grant with First Down Training, and today we're going to be breaking down how quarterbacks can avoid having arm pain, elbow injuries, shoulder injuries with this simple mechanical tip. So we're going to be showing an incorrect throwing motion, and then we're going to be breaking down a correct throwing motion from Tom Brady and how you're able to avoid those arm injuries. So I hope this video helps you guys out, but also, fellas, if you're a quarterback and you would like to train with us this offseason, we are coming out to 15 more states across the country for 2-day long QB and wide receiver camps. So check out that very first link in the description below if you're interested. We're coming out to San Francisco, Miami, Las Vegas, Charlotte, Portland, Dallas, Nashville, Chicago, Buffalo, Atlanta, Houston, Philly, Detroit, Boise, and Los Angeles. If you're local to any one of these cities, fellas, we would love to have you out. Again, very first link in that description below. Let's get started with this video. So one of the main keys to throwing with power, fellas, and to be able to take pressure off of your arm is to be able to utilize your legs and your hips and your core properly in your throwing motion. That's why so many quarterback coaches harp on hip rotation. They harp on taking a short stride. I talk a lot about keeping our weight loaded on my back leg, and it's all honestly for velocity, obviously for consistency, but also to keep my arm healthy. Fellas, you got to understand that these guys in the NFL who have these mechanical like throws, right? They all have unique throwing motions, but they all have certain aspects that are very similar. And the similar aspect they have is the timing of their hip rotation and their front stride / weight distribution. All of them have this in common because they need to have it in common. The amount of throws that they are making on a weekly basis, if they had flawed mechanics and were using all arm, all upper body, their arm would fall off, fellas. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So this is a clip here from Malik Willis, like pre-draft, and this is an example of having a long front stride. So like I said, we're going to show an example of Tom Brady throwing after this and compare the two, but his issue that makes him throw all with his upper half is solely this front stride. And so many young quarterbacks have a problem taking a big front stride and improper hip sequencing. So let's start it all from just like the throwing sequence, I guess you could say. So in your throwing sequence, I like to break it down into 4 parts. This is efficiently how we rotate. And like I said, we're going to compare this with Brady's throwing sequence in a second, talk about the differences. First part is going to be the base. I think Malik Willis right here has a perfect base. He's got about 70% of his weight on his back leg. His back foot is underneath his frame. This is an efficient position to throw the football. His front foot is nice and light. This is exactly where you want to be. So going from this position, you want to try to get to something called hip and shoulder dissociation, which essentially means your upper body is separate from your lower body. When you take a front stride at the target, let's say he's throwing like a curl over here. When you take a step to that curl, you want to maintain some weight on your back leg so we can rotate and have my shoulders go back. A lot of quarterbacks, what happens is in their base, they have the opposite of this. They almost look like a bike kickstand. They're really heavy with their front foot. Their body weight is shifted forward, and they physically can't get to that dissociation where the shoulders and the hips are separate because their weight's not back. When your weight is forward, you can't rotate that front shoulder. Everything is going this way when we need your upper body to go this way. Okay, so now the next part of the throwing sequence, we want my weight back. We want to take a short stride, and when I stride, I want my shoulders to be back, because then if I take a short stride, I have my weight where it needs to be, my feet are inside my frame, the next part of my throwing motion can be the hip rotation. And if this back hip can fire through before my shoulders and before my elbow come through, I am throwing the ball with my legs and my hips. It takes pressure off my arm. Now, that's the throwing sequence, right? It's base, stride, hips, ball. Let's watch what Malik Willis does here. So instead of just taking a short stride, he makes a cardinal mistake that so many guys make, and he pushes off of his back foot, almost like how a pitcher would push off of a mound. So if you're a baseball pitcher, you're familiar with how they push off of a mound. Now you might be thinking, well, guys, pitchers throw all the time, and they have this really long stride, and they're rotating from their hips, they're rotating from their legs, they could throw a lot. Here's the thing, though. A football is a lot heavier than a baseball, number one, and it's a different type of throw. They are coming off of a mound. We are staying on a flat surface, and we have to throw the ball and drive the ball further. When you're throwing a baseball, how far are you throwing? Like 90 feet, maybe less than that, right? How far are you throwing a football? More than 90 feet, I can guarantee you that, because you're trying to drive the ball downfield. That's why this is an issue. That's why you need to use your legs and your hips. So let's talk about it. Because he pushes off of this back foot, guys, we never want to push. We are not linear players. We are rotational players. We are rotational athletes. So when you push from a perfect base like this, and you see how that step is just super long, what ends up happening when he makes contact with the ground? His feet are way too wide outside of his frame. Now, when that foot makes contact, he actually does a good job of going back with the football and getting to this backstroke like opposite L position. So when his back hip rotates through, the arm goes up to 90. But here's the thing. Your back hip is not going to fire through when you have this really long stride. So watch what ends up happening. The hip rotation is non-existent. When he goes through on the throw, you see how his shoulder, elbow, wrist, football are all ahead of his back hip and his back foot is going this way. This means that he is not engaging his legs and he is not engaging his hips at all in the throw. He is being very linear. The front foot's down, right? But in that front foot probably locks out. You see how it kind of raises up, legs coming out of the ground. All of that has everything to do with the long stride. Guys, you do not want to push to create power off the back leg. You want to keep your back leg loaded like this so your shoulders can go back, the football can go back, and when that stride gets down almost in place, now since your feet aren't super wide, your feet are inside your frame, you could actually rotate at your hips and get that back hip to fire through. But guys, we never want to be to this position. And remember, this looks a lot like a pitcher coming off of a mound. Number one, pitcher is not throwing it as far. Number two, they're throwing downhill. Number three, the football is a lot heavier than a baseball. So we need to use more of my hips and more of my legs to alleviate that pressure off of my arm. But guys, this is not a good spot to be. And now, like I said, we are going to compare this with Tom Brady's throwing motion. And Malik actually corrected this too, by the way. This is just a good example for everybody to see. But Malik Willis corrected this before he got drafted to the Titans. So I want to put that out there. Like, and if you watch Malik Willis's throwing motion when he was with the Titans compared to this, totally different ball game. I'm using this as an example because there are so many young quarterbacks that have this long stride problem. So let's take a look at Brady's throw here. So what was that throwing sequence that we talked about? Number one, we want to make sure that I have my weight back, right? Your back foot should be underneath your back shoulder. Brady is a little wide too, by the way. But you see how his knee isn't caved in? He's not like super wide. Like this is a good base for him right here because he's able to maintain his weight on that back leg, 70%, nice and light on the front foot. Looks a lot like Anthony Richardson's base, right? Not Anthony Richardson, excuse me, Malik Willis's base. It looks a lot like Malik Willis's base. So if he's got the same exact base, but watch the different throwing motion. Watch how much smoother Brady's looks than Willis. Hips are able to go through. Back hip, let's look at the finish point. Back hip, leg coming through, foot pivoting, elbow and football behind the hip. Let's go back to Malik Willis. Where was he at that exact same position when he started to go through? Shoulder, elbow, football, all ahead of back hip. Foot is not pivoting, foot swinging behind. This is the difference between an arm throw and a leg hip throw, right? So let's talk about it. So Brady, front foot's down in the ground. Where is his weight? And again, you see how short of a stride it is. It's inside of his shoulder frame. Short stride, shoulders loaded back, ball is going back, feet are inside of his frame, actually in a position where his hips can rotate through. So front stride, so we started with the base, that's the first part. Second part is the stride. Third part is the hips coming through before the shoulders. So we have to make sure on step 2 that the ball goes back and my front shoulder actually closes. It stays closed. So front foot gets down, that's that dissociation. Foot is down, we're driving here, weight is back. So now, his back hip and his front hip starts to pull through, back hip starts to drive through, hip is coming through before the elbow, before the football. That's where we want to be. They call this a C curve, fellas. If you can get to that C curve, you're in an efficient position where you are using your legs and your hips. Guys, every single quarterback should shoot for this position. And again, I am not saying that all quarterbacks have to throw the same, but there are mechanical similarities that all of the top passers in the game have. And the simplest way for me to say it, let's forget about throwing sequence, forget about stride length. They all get to the C curve. Aaron Rodgers C curve, Mahomes C curve, Brady C curve, everybody. They all get to this position. And you cannot get to this position without having an understanding of that throwing sequence. So to recap, where we want to be, to use more of my hips, to use more of my legs, to alleviate that pressure off my shoulder, my elbow, my arm as a whole. Weight's got to be back, number 1, 70%, light on the front foot. You take a stride. When that front foot makes contact with the ground, you maintain some weight back here so you could stay under your body frame. When you take that stride, those shoulders go back. So now that my feet are both grounded, my hips can rotate through, hips clear, football and elbow are trailing behind. That takes pressure off that arm. and that's how I could finish. So that's a great mechanical example here from Tom Brady. That is exactly what you want to shoot for throwing sequence-wise. All right, fellas, really want to thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to leave those in the comment section below. Always appreciate the feedback. It's always great to hear from you guys. And again, fellas, if you would like to train with us in 15 different states this offseason, check out that very first link in the description below. We're coming out from San Francisco all the way to Detroit, Philly, Houston. Again, very first link in that description below. I'll see you guys next time.